Hey, Inchworms and Grasshopper friends, I am back this week to talk a little bit about the coming warmer weather. This past Saturday gave me the confidence that now is the time, and so today I'm going to focus on two parts of the coming warmer weather. One, a little bit kind of like parent information, businessy stuff, and talking about sunscreen and sun protection, and then the other is focus a little bit more on warm weather water play, and some ways to do that with your 6 to 18-month-old baby. So first to business. So Saturday was like that first warm day when we were outside. It was warm enough to be pleasant. And when we came in, I kind of was like, ooh, like I feel a little pink right here. And that is always my cue to remember, like, okay, this is the time to make sure that like we have sunscreen, one, and that we're using it, number two. And so with my kids who are a little bit older, 4, almost 9 and 11, I still use the sunscreen that I used for them when they first could wear sunscreen at about age 6 months or so, as babies, because it does not make their skin break out. It is super effective. It goes on really easily. And the characteristic about it that makes it safe for kids to use, even younger kids, is that it is a physical sunscreen and not a chemical sunscreen. And so a physical sunscreen works by providing a protective layer on top of the skin, that protects it from the sun's rays versus soaking into your child's skin, which a chemical sunscreen does. And so the key thing that you want to look for is that physical sunscreen will have an active ingredient that is either titanium dioxide or zinc oxide. And when you hear zinc, you might think about like that super thick stuff, and it's not like that. It does not leave like a thick, greasy coating on your kid's skin, but it does work by being able to just provide that physical barrier, and it is something that is much safer to use for your younger babies. And so the brands that we really like are Badger is one, and Blue Lizard is another, and both of those are things that we have continued to use up through their childhood because they worked so well and because I know that they're safe. And so those are the things that you want to be looking for in a sunscreen. The things that you want to avoid, the chemical sunscreen, the kind of keywords there, the active ingredients, would be some type of benzone, oxybenzone, something like that. And so that's kind of a cue to you that that's probably not the best choice for your baby. And so, sunscreen is obviously one thing that is important. One thing that I do recommend is getting some type of sunscreen in stick form. We really like the Badger stick. It's just super easy for like noses and cheekbones and kind of those little hot spots that sometimes get hit even if you are using sun protective clothing, which we're going to talk about in a second. And so, just as you're kind of preparing for that warmer weather, hopefully us being able to spend a little bit more time outside, even if it's just in our own spaces and backyard. Those are some things that you might want to think of and be prepared for. And I believe, and I hope I'm not promising something that isn't true yet, but Bolani does always carry really great brands of sunscreen, and this is right around the time when usually they start having it in stock, and she is still doing free delivery and curbside pickup. So if you're looking for something that is safe for your babies and you want to make sure you have that in your house in preparation for the next nice day, I would definitely reach out. And so sunscreen is just one part of the picture though. I mean, obviously, if you think about all of the things that you have to do with your babies and young children that they already don't like, putting sunscreen on them is usually pretty high on that list. And so the less surface area you have to cover with sunscreen for them, the better. If you can instead focus on figuring out ways to physically block the sun through sun protective clothing or sun hats, then, that is definitely something that you want to have on hand as well. So I went as a part of a little show and tell, because when it's videos, I like to have props. I just went and grabbed my daughter's sun hat, which we got at Bolani a couple of summers ago. I think this is actually now going to be either her third or maybe fourth summer wearing it. And there are a couple of components that I always look for. One is that it's made of that good sun protective cloth to make sure that her nice fair little blonde part doesn't get any sun on it. The second thing that I really like is having this nice wide brim. So there are a couple of styles that my kids have liked. One kind of has the bigger brim in the front and then like the longer flap in the back for covering the neck. But I also like this bucket style. It does a really good job still of covering the back of their neck and covering their ears. And the other thing that I really like is the ability to have some adjustability. So the fact that you can kind of cinch it right around their head helps a lot on windy days, helps it stay on properly, helps it from flopping down their eyes, which is going to annoy them and make them more resistant to wearing the hat. And then also having the nice ties. My sister-in-law had a little bit of a hat-resistant kid with my nephew, and so she actually started using a technique where she would cross the ties over and do the bow like right up here by his ear so that he wouldn't be able to just easily grab it and then take it off again. So the trick with, getting kids used to hats is really just persistence. But the other thing is that a lot of times, kids, little babies especially, obviously, they can't really verbalize things. They have a harder time understanding what you're trying to say, but they do still notice cause and effect. And so similar to, if your child is resistant to wearing a coat when it's cold outside, but then they go outside and they're cold, they're okay with you putting the coat on them or the hat on them. It's going to be the same when you go out on that nice sunny day and the sun is in their eyes and that kind of feels overwhelming. And then all of a sudden you're popping the hat on. Consistency is key, but definitely getting one that's well fitted and isn't interfering with their vision or the way that they want to play is helpful as well. So again, just a little visual reminder, hats are great. Sun protective clothing is great. I love all sorts of, long sleeve rash guards, that sun protective clothing that you can get pretty much anywhere. We use it for backyard play, those nice long shirts, the longer board shorts, even for my daughter. It's just easier than having to cover a lot of surface area with sunscreen. So that's just my plug for maybe picking up a few of those items if you don't have them already. And then the other is shade. So really thinking about, again, the idea that we're going to be hanging out at home a lot this summer, sticking pretty close by. And so what kinds of things might you need in order to make some good backyard space that would also create a little bit of shade? For your, 6 to 12-month-old baby, sometimes they are content with a, kind of smaller gated in type of situation. I know some people will just actually bring their playpen right out and then put a type of sun covering right over it because it has those nice mesh sides where your baby can breathe, and that will provide some shade for them. But also you might want to think about getting some type of like pop-up tent or like half dome type tent that would provide some shelter or some shade, a nice big umbrella, one of those, if you have one of those pop-up canopies, sometimes that's a nice thing to be able to set up in the backyard, just to have available for going out and taking advantage of that shade for backyard play. So just, now is the time to kind of start thinking about some of those things. Once you're out in the backyard, it's also time to start thinking about what are some fun things for this age range to do that are, that's entertaining and age appropriate for them. One of my all-time favorite backyard toys is a water table and sandbox, probably tied. Some people combine the two, but we love the water table. And water table usually requires, that your child is able to kind of stand up at it. Although if you do have one, most of them you can actually just take the legs off and rest right on the ground. So if that's something that like you've already bought ahead or somebody has gifted for you, but maybe your little one isn't quite tall enough or just is not at that age of being able to pull up and stand up, you can always pop the legs right off and fill it and just rest it on the ground, and they can approach it that way. If you've not yet invested in a water table, or your baby's not going to be quite old enough to really make full use or enjoy it this summer, water play is still a really easy and engaging and fun thing for them to do. With probably items that you have around at home. So usually in group, when we do our water play lesson, the things that I would bring in would look similar to this. So just a small bucket. I got this one at the dollar store. And if you want something slightly larger or flatter, one of these kind of deals is really great. So think about like any type of like little Rubbermaid basin you might have. If you stole that like pink thing from the hospital, they have in the hospital room, sometimes that's a really great one just to bring outside. And like with a lot of types of play that I talk about with this age, less is more. You do not need all the bells and whistles. You do not need 9 million things to be inside this bucket for them to find it interesting. This bucket with maybe 2 inches of water in it, and then maybe a couple of these types of little items. Some little sponges that you cut up into sections so they're small for little hands. Just water and a sponge at first can be really interesting to them as they realize how it absorbs, and they squeeze it because that's kind of their natural inclination, and they watch it drip. Maybe something like a measuring spoon or a little scooper. You want to add in something like some little plastic animals, maybe some of like their tub toys that you're ready to kind of rotate out, or some, some extra little plastic guys that you have, especially for like the 12 to 18-month-old set. They can really mimic like doing some washing. You could have one other container in here to scoop and pour if you want. But the thing is that you want to think about, whether it's a water table or whether it's just setting up something like this, is to do a little bit and then kind of add a little bit more as you see their interest kind of like, well, like that's not really so fun anymore. And that might not even be on the same day. I just mean like over time, you might want to add a new element or present something different when you bring this back out again. I say like 2 inches of water or so because they're going to dump it. They're going to get super wet. That's fine. That's the benefit of being able to go and play outside, to be able to do things like this. A couple of other kind of extension activity ideas for doing some simple water play is using a couple of squirts of like their bath soap, making some bubbles in there and letting them play and interact with that. Another thing that especially slightly older babies seem to like is doing some things where maybe you would change some temperature. You put a couple of ice cubes to float in there and they could chase those around. Kind of the next level up of that is actually using a bowl to layer and freeze some like little plastic toys in, and then upending that in a bigger basin of water and showing them how when you pour water over it makes the ice melt, and you can kind of get out the little toys. You can even use like medicine droppers if your 12 to 18-month-old baby is really into doing like fine motor skills stuff. Like sometimes they can kind of get that motion down. You could use big like watercolor paint brushes to kind of smooth over the ice and try to create patterns or melt things. But those are just some simple ideas of things that you might already have that you can incorporate into doing some water play with your babies as the weather gets a little bit nicer and as you're kind of setting up some of those spaces outside. So safety and fun, those are the 2 biggest things that we can be looking forward to as the weather gets a little bit nicer. And I will be back next week with with another lesson for you guys on social emotional development. As always, I hope that you guys are doing well. I miss you all. Take care, and I hope to see you all soon. Take care. Bye-bye.